Welcome to Stroke, the Journey Within podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Outlaw. I got a real exciting and special guest today. His name is Kenneth Monaghan, and he's an author and of a book called Lights, Mirrors, Action. And you can find out why in just a minute. Let me bring him up online. Hey, Kenneth.
Hello, Aaron. How are you?
I'm doing really good. How's the weather in Ireland this morning?
Well, it's a mixed. It was raining earlier on, but now it's actually 24 degrees and sunny. So, a very mixed day. I think we're going to have a small heat wave over the next few days. So,
Oh, great. Well, what time is it there in Ireland right now?
it's 5 p.m. 5
Okay.
p.m.
It's 9:02 a.m. here, so a little different time.
Oh,
But Kenneth, please do me a favor, introduce yourself to the audience.
yeah. Thank you, Aaron, and thank you for inviting me onto your show because I've listened to lots of your podcasts over the last 18 months, and learned so much information from your guests. My name is Kenneth Monaghan. I'm a university lecturer in the Atlantic Technological University in Sligo in Ireland. I've been a physical therapist or a physiotherapist in Ireland for the last 33 years. And over the last 16 years, I've specialized and become very interested in the area of neuroplasticity, especially using neuroplasticity, especially developing new treatments in my research group to help stroke patients after they are discharged home. And about just over a year ago, I wrote a book called Lights, Mirrors, Action, a guide for transforming the lives of caregivers and stroke survivors, because my experience over the last 20, 25 years has been that when patients are discharged home, they're usually very underprepared, and also their family members are very underprepared for that phase of their rehabilitation. So the book was written to try and help people, to give them confidence, to give them some guidance and a bit of motivation to know that you can recover at any stage at any time after a stroke, and you must know that neuroplasticity can happen when you're prepared to work really, really, really hard, doing very simple things. So hopefully we'll get an opportunity to talk about those things today. But the last year has been really exciting, because the book has been selling everywhere in the world, and I've received such feedback from people, and it had given me more confidence, even from when I started, that there's definitely a need for this type of information out there. So thank you for having me on.
Oh, sure, Ken. It's really my pleasure. Could you have a copy of your book you can unlock?
What's that? Do you want to see the book?
Yes, please.
So can you see that, Aaron?
Yeah, I like to rise. I will put also community. I will put a link in the description of the video. Ken, let's start out with some real basic stuff for people that may hear the word neuroplasticity. What is it?
Well, it's a term that describes the ability of your brain to, you know, create new pathways and to change its structure based on everything that you do physically and also what you do mentally. So your brain, Aaron, is going to be changing at this moment was as you're listening and talking to me. And likewise, my brain is going to be changing because I'm on the show here. And everybody needs to understand that, I suppose, it's been over the last 10 to 20 years that people have have discovered that the brain's structure changes like that. When I qualified as a physiotherapist or physical therapist 33 years ago, I was taught that, if a person had a stroke, that within 6 to 9 months, that was really the total amount of time that a person's, brain and body had to recover. And of course, we know that that's nonsense now, and we know that that's not true. We know that if a person works hard and does repetitive exercises and safe therapies, they can get a recovery years and years after a stroke. So it's important that your listeners and your your colleagues and stroke survivors know that piece of information, because hopefully it'll give them motivation. But neuroplasticity is a very interesting thing, and for any of your listeners that want to read more about neuroplasticity, of course, I have a chapter dedicated to it in my book. But probably one of the gurus and most interesting and most famous books that are available is from a man called Norman Doidge.
Yes, I know.
And Norman has written two fantastic books. The first one was called The Brain That Changes Itself. And that was the book that really inspired me to, set up my research group in Ireland, and to work developing different treatments that could stimulate the brain in an unusual way. So yes, neuroplasticity, very important that, if you've had a stroke, I think it's probably one of the starting things that you need to be educated about neuroplasticity. You need to know that your brain can create new pathways, it can create a new structure, but you have to work hard. You have to work for your brain to do that. But you can control that, and that's a very positive and a very exciting thing for you to know.
Yeah, Kenneth, I mean, here I am, 15 years post brain aneurysm stroke. I've been in a wheelchair. My left hand is a little. So, is there any hope for me?
Well, I suppose, first of all, it depends physically on how your limbs are at this moment, 15 years on after your stroke. What can happen to people, and I'm sure you've seen this yourself, and I'm sure you've seen it in some of your colleagues and friends, if if you don't keep your tissues, your muscles, your ligaments, your soft tissues, if you don't keep them stretched out and you keep the length in them, then a lot of patients develop develop rigidity. They develop the inability to move their limbs, and so they can end up with a very stiff arm and a stiff shoulder and a stiff hip and a stiff knee and a stiff ankle. And of course, if you've lost that ability to stretch out your muscles and to move the tissues in them, it doesn't matter how much electricity comes to them in the future. You're never going to regain movement in those things. So for people who are starting off now, and if you were 15 years ago, Aaron, I'd be advocating and I'd be recommending that you would definitely try and keep the movement, the range of movement in your limbs, even if you don't have any power there, so that if neuroplasticity happens and if you get a return of motor control, then you have limbs that can move and can adapt to that. But your physical health can improve all the time if you're willing to do simple exercises. And um, patients have reported numerous times over the years that even 5-10 years after strokes, that they can receive some functional benefits. We've seen that in our clinical trials in our university, when we used the different therapies that we're very interested in. Those therapies, one example of them would be mirror therapy. And we have seen that even when patients 5 to 10 years after stroke have, tried using mirror therapy for their upper or their lower limbs, or even we developed mirror therapy for patients while they were walking on a treadmill, which was very interesting, that those patients felt that they were, somewhat improved. Their functional ability, their quality of life, their belief in themselves improved. So even though they may not have had brilliant extra movements, they felt that they had had some functional benefits from undertaking those therapies. So I suppose I'd need to see you, Aaron, to see what your deficits and what little limitations and things you have. But definitely, I'm 100% in belief that if you're still willing to do repetitive exercises, if you're still willing to challenge your brain and to endure, to really keep going with things, you are possibly still able to get some benefits.
Yeah, Kenneth, it's funny. I think it was last year. I had a neuroplastician like you on my show, on my podcast, And he said repetition is the language of the brain. And the repetitive nature of that, of doing it. But it again, if I understand correctly, as a stroke survivor, I've been doing this 10 years, is that emotions and your excitement and energy are being involved in what you're doing. A huge difference.
Yes. Um, you are going, I suppose everybody straight away after, have a stroke is highly motivated during that initial period. I'm sure you were the same.
Yeah.
And, that there is obviously an optimum period when your brain is more likely to adapt in response to different therapies. And you're more likely to be motivated in the early stages, the first few weeks and the first few months, because the chances are that you will see improvements in yourself. So this is a very important part of motivation as well, is that you have somebody that can help you to recognize when you're making improvements. So I discussed this in one of my chapters in the book, the idea of using little scales or little measurements, because and my analogy here is it's like our kids here in the house. We have two children, and when they were growing up, we used to keep a little, we used to measure their heights by putting a little mark
Right.
on the wall. And it's amazing, so many times their grandparents would come in and say, "Oh my God, James and Ellen got so tall," and I'd be looking at them saying, "Did they?" And then we'd put them up against the wall and they would have increased by maybe a centimeter or two. And you see, the reason for that is that they were getting taller so slowly. And a lot of stroke patients are exactly the same in terms of, increasing their movement or increasing their strength or improving their balance or improving their walking. They find it very difficult to see little subtle improvements in themselves. So that's why it's very important, as an example, that a patient would have somebody take a little video recording of them moving their limbs if they're able to do that, a simple video recording of somebody taking a few steps in the corridor, and repeating that on a regular basis. I know it's not easy sometimes for people to be recorded when they've had a stroke, because people don't naturally like to see themselves not being able to move correctly. But it's amazing. I've used this with a lot of patients over the years, where we take a video of somebody walking in the corridor, and then we take the video a week or 2 weeks later, and we show it to the patient themselves, and they can see that the fluidity, the step lengths, the kind of alignment of the person has changed significantly, and it's amazing how motivating that is for them. So, having somebody that can help you at home, a carer or a family member or a friend, to be able to record something like that, or being able to do it yourself, those simple things help an awful lot in terms of your motivation and trying to keep you going for as long as it may take for you. Would that be your experience, Aaron, over the years?
Yeah, I would have to say, I mean, a lot of my disappointment, first of all, because they say I'm going to recover, as if I'm not a big advocate of the word recovery. I feel like we're rebuilding our lives. We're not
Yes.
recovering. I don't think I'll ever be who I was. I never actually recover like exactly like I was before my stroke. But I think the important thing you're saying is you can rebuild, you can, and the main, one of the keys, number one, understand what neuroplasticity is, so triggers it, by Kenneth Buck, and learn to use it. Now, I think the repetition is so important. Hard work. I'll be honest with you. I thought when you hear the word recovery, I've recovered from a cold. I've recovered from flu. I've recovered from cuts, wounds. And my body does it automatically, but there's a big difference in the recovery. The word recovery used in a stroke context is different. I figure it's, I think we're building is more of an accurate word is mine. I think rebuilding, you as a therapist, teaching me how to rebuild my life,
Yes.
and that's just my opinion. That's just how I say it. But tell me, how do we utilize? We know kind of basically what plasticity is, the brain's ability to change. But how do you wrote a book called Lights, Mirrors, Action? And I told you I was going to get in the main mirror, and I have a mirror box, but I wasn't able to do it, which is probably good. But tell me how mirrors affect neuroplasticity.
Well, mirror therapy, as you're familiar with, is the idea that if you can't move your left hand, if I can't move my left hand after I've had a stroke, so mirror therapy was not started. It wasn't invented for patients after stroke. It was invented for patients who suffered from phantom limb pain. And phantom limb pain happens if you, Aaron, if you lost your left hand in the morning in an accident. Well, there's almost 100% chance you'll suffer from phantom limb pain. Your brain will struggle to understand where the messages are that are coming from the limb that's missing, and you will believe that your hand is still there and it will feel sore. So this amazing Indian researcher back in the early 90s, Ramachandran, he discovered that if you sat at a table, for example, and the limb that's missing, if you covered it, so if you put a mirror um, sideways on the table, so if my book is sideways and my hand that is missing the hand, um, if the reflective side of the mirror is facing my good hand, the hand that's still there, and if I position myself, if I tilt the mirror and I tilt my head in a certain way that I look and I see a reflection of the good hand, the hand that's still there in the mirror, my brain gets tricked, if you want to call it that, but my brain sees an image of the hand and it actually helps the brain to become desensitized. And this was almost like a miracle cure for patients who had had phantom limb pain. And subsequently, after that, quite a number of researchers, you know, re- tried to use this therapy with stroke patients. And of course, um, lots of really, really high evidence now. So systematic literature reviews and, high impact factored journals have shown that patients who use a similar mirror to, cover the hand or the fingers that can't work and look at an image of the good hand moving, it can trigger your brain to restructure itself. It can trigger new pathways to be created. And for some patients, and we've had examples of this in our own research lab, for some patients, this is a miracle cure. It can. I had a man that uh, he was in our research group a number of years ago, and he hadn't any movement in his hand for 3 to 4 months after he'd had a stroke. Um, and he tried mirror therapy for the first time, and within 10 weeks he was back with full movement. Now he's only one example, and he had a great recovery, but he felt that it was like a miracle to him. Other patients don't get always, it's not a guaranteed treatment, but what's good about mirror therapy is that it's a very inexpensive thing to use in your own home. um, and there are probably about 15 to 20 different therapies that are more than safe to use in a person's own home. And it's likely when you use therapies in your own home that you will be able to use them repetitively for the amount of time that is recommended to give you the best chance of creating more neuroplasticity and creating a rebuild, as you say. So I suppose what my important message here is that I discovered over the last 15 years from working with patients in their own homes that most patients, from my experience, and most caregivers and family members, they don't get the preparation, the education, the information they need when they're being discharged home from a rehabilitation center. And so they go home almost depressed and very down in themselves because they think that's the end of my recovery now. And I want to change that. I want the message to change that, you know, going home and being discharged home from a rehabilitation center is just you moving to the next phase of your rehabilitation and your rebuild, because and that your home has huge underestimated advantages for a stroke patient and for a caregiver and a family member that people undervalue, because it's never been taught to them. And that, I suppose, my book has most of that information in it that hopefully gives people confidence and gives them direction. I mention, I have some example programs that patients can use in a morning and in the evening, and it takes into account the 2 to 3 hours of therapy that's recommended nowadays from the stroke associations, and all of the therapies use very simplified pieces of equipment. Mirror therapy uses a mirror that can cost, $10 to $15 very easily. We use a very simple strengthening therapy called cross education of strengthening. I don't know if you're familiar with that therapy, Aaron, but it's the idea that, if you went to the gym, if I went to the gym for 6 weeks and I only strengthened the right side of my body, I would never really do that in practice, but if I did, after 6 weeks, the right side of my body would be much, much stronger. But amazingly, if you measure the left hand side of the body, even though it hasn't done any exercise, it can be 40 to 50% stronger after those 6 weeks, because there's an actual electricity flow between the two sides of our brains that probably, most people are not aware of. So we can harness that type of a therapy at home by using a very simple resistance band as well. And there are lots of other therapies that patients can use. And it's important that, stroke survivors and patients, and they experiment with different therapies and figure out what works for them or what they feel works best and what they like best. I don't know, Aaron, if you can think back to your years when you were discharged home, but you know I don't know if people said to you, well, look try out all these different therapies and decide which ones you feel gives you the best benefit. But nowadays, that's what we advocate for, because when patients take control or feel that they're helping, and being active in their treatments, they tend to get better results, because there's like they feel, they're inputting into their therapy. So all of these things are very important to mention to the people who are listening to this. I am 100%. Before I wrote the book, I was totally convinced that people can really use their homes brilliantly to recover after a stroke and to do their physical rehab at home. And now that I'm a year, 14 months after the book has been published, and I've received so much feedback from different sources and, different associations throughout the world, now I'm even 10 times more convinced, because I hear the same stories all the time. And it seems that there's a need for this type of education to just give people a little bit more hope, I think.
Yeah, I think, part of, I'm going to Monica a doc, but part of the amazing thing I see out there, Kenneth, is I've been a stroke survivor, serving the stroke community for 10 years. And I have seen, I'm one of them, who was sent home with nothing. I really was sent home with no uh, understanding of neuroplasticity, no understanding of the brain's ability to heal, no understanding of recovery repetition. So I hope we do succeed and get that more and more. And again, if it's anything Stroke TV media can do to help promote that, when that discharge occurs, people are really equipped for success. Right now, my belief, Ken, I don't mean to, I'm not trying to diss the, the medical community, but I'm saying we could do a lot better educating the strokes of others who's being sent home.
Yeah, I think so. I hear this all the time. And I hope that over the coming months that, parts of my book can lead to, the creation of more and more handouts, educational handouts and things that can be given to patients. Because I think I think ideally, Aaron, when a patient has been when discharge is been planned, and usually that's been done 1 to 2 weeks before a person goes home, I think that's the time that the education and some of this information really, really needs to be explained to a stroke survivor if they have the cognitive ability to understand that. But just as importantly, to the carer or the family member, because most family members really, 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 really want to help, and they will do anything to help. And a lot of times they feel very paralyzed because they're afraid that they might do harm. So just for some information and very simple guidance, and to explain as well the idea that, you know, a stroke patient the aims nowadays for are the recommendations from a lot of the stroke associations are that, we aim for even 2 to 3 hours of physical rehabilitation every day if it can be tolerated. And that can be lots of different sessions, small sessions, 10, 15, 20-minute sessions with frequent breaks between them. But to have a timetable set out so that, different therapies can be tried, and, it's not going to cause the person to, it's highly unlikely to cause the person to have another stroke. So it's that information that really needs to be gotten out from, hospitals, rehabilitation centers. But very much, as we started talking about, the starting point for me is that you must understand what neuroplasticity is. You must understand that your brain has a brilliant ability to change itself and to change its structure and change its shape and all of those things. But what seems to be the best way to do that is to carry out lots and lots of repetitions of sensible and simple exercises that can be done. And that seems to be the message that's coming through from most of the rehabilitation experts around the world. And that's not easy. So there's no getting away from it. It's easy for me to sit here and to tell people to work for 2 and 3 hours every day doing different therapies. It's hard. It's very hard. But at least the knowledge that if you can do that, and if you can see a little bit of progress, however you measure it, then you can keep going, and progress is possible all the time. And I suppose the earlier that you try and start those things, the better, and probably the more better chance that a person has. But yeah, and you see, so look at the home is a brilliant place to be doing therapy. There's a lot of different advantages that a home has. One simple advantage, by the way, is that, and a brilliant professor in Trinity College from Dublin in Ireland, Ian Robertson is his name, Aaron. He wrote a brilliant book called The Winner Effect. And Ian explains that when a person is in their home environment, their bodies produce a little bit extra testosterone because of the familiarity with the sights, the sounds, the smells, the routines, everything that you're familiar with creates a little bit of extra testosterone. And of course, testosterone is that rebuilding hormone that we create in our bodies. So just to know that that goes on physiologically in your body when you're in your own home, as opposed to being away from it, that's actually a brilliant natural advantage that people can utilize. The fact that you have more flexibility when you're in your own home to do your therapy, that's actually an underestimated thing as well. When I worked as a physical therapist in rehabilitation centers all over, and I worked in America, Aaron. I worked in Florida from 1993 to 1996, where I worked in a lot of rehabilitation centers, and it was a great experience over there. I met some of the best therapists I'd ever worked with at that stage in my life. Brilliant facilities, brilliant ideas, brilliant therapists. Um, so we need to explain to people that, and when I what I was sorry, I lost the train of thought there, but what I was going to say to you is that when when I worked in rehabilitation centres, of naturally I would schedule patients for their rehabilitation every day, and that would be in the morning and the evening, and they would be set times because I didn't have so much flexibility because I had other patients to see. So if you were scheduled for 10 o'clock in the morning and you happen to be very fatigued and very tired from whatever went on the day before, then probably 10 o'clock wasn't the best time for you. um, if you're in your own home and you're very fatigued at 10 o'clock in the morning when you usually start your program, well, you can start your program later because it's your own home and you have that flexibility, and your family care is able to do that. And those are underestimated things that can happen, you see. And, look at from a social point of view as well, it seems to be very important that when you've had a stroke, when anybody is sick, that neighbors and friends and people come in, and we get that that energy boost from people just well wishing and coming in, even helping out, and all of that seems to be very important. And a lot of times we can't have the ability to get that in a rehabilitation center. Now look, I understand, of course, depending on a person's disability, some patients may need maximum health help, and of course an assistance, and maybe some of those things can only happen in an assisted facility. But for people who are, usually when people are discharged home, it's because the rehabilitation center has deemed that they are at a functional level where they're able to cope with their family and they're able to manage. So for that type of person, the home can be a fantastic place. Would you agree with any of those things, or would you kind of would you have thought about those things? Would it be your experience from when you were discharged yourself home, Aaron? Can you remember back to that time?
Yeah, oh yeah. Um, I would have to say yes. I agree with the home being ideal, but I don't think the education from the hospital told me how great it was. I think that because right, I was pushed to go 4 times a day to therapy, but now in reality, once I got out of hospital, nothing can happen. It's not happening, but there's something that you said that made me kind of back up on the word rebuilding versus recovery. Is that when you were speaking, neuroplasticity is recovery. It is the brain's ability to heal itself. And so I think from this point on, I'm gonna go with the word recovery because because I'm gonna have you back on, but if we can harness the power of neuroplasticity in every stroke survivor's life and then reignite their excitement about being home and the ability of home being a great place to recover, then I'm going to use the word recovery for now on because neuroplasticity is recovery.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've listened to your podcast before, and I've heard you say and explain why the word rebuild is probably a good word, and I agree with that as well, I have to say. I suppose, look at the very simple message that I wanted to get across to people by writing this book was that the home, this moment, the moment when you hear that you're being discharged home, hopefully it can be a positive moment rather than a negative moment for a stroke survivor. At the moment, most times, based on my experience and based on research and everything that I've read, most people will say that it's a negative experience because they believe that it's kind of the end of the road as far as their intense therapy is concerned. But if people will, I suppose, take my word, and the book is full of science, so it's not my personal opinion, it's not anecdotal information, it's all based on science, but I try to explain the information in a very easy to understand way. um, if people will believe what I'm writing, that the home has huge natural advantages, very simple therapies that are very inexpensive can be carried out at home and can have brilliant effects on people. If this information is given to patients in advance of going home, I think it may be possible in the future for people to be a more positive mindset going home and then benefit better from that. And that's probably the most important message that I want to get across to your listeners through your podcast, Aaron, is that, don't be dreading the idea of going home if just because you're not fully recovered in your mind, or you're not rebuilt, depending on what definition you like to use. Realize that when you get to your home, that is a different phase of your therapy where things will be done slightly different, but they are just equally and sometimes more effective on your brain's ability to change itself. And that's quite an important message to come across today.
But, I'm going to have you back on a couple times, I think, because I got a lot of questions for you one at a time, unfortunately. But, Kenneth, Ken, I really appreciate taking the time and being here and really dedicating your life to helping us, my people, my community. So I really appreciate that. I really, really do.
Oh, well, you're very good. Look at you dedicate your life, and obviously, you know personally what it's like to suffer a stroke. I can't know that, but I speak to people every day of my life. I've worked with patients who've had strokes, so I can, I try as best as I can to understand the difficulties that people endure and experience, and the fears that people have. And for that reason, I wrote this book in a very easy to understand way as an education piece, Aaron, as a piece of information that people could read in advance of going home that hopefully will give them confidence. Now, if your listeners would like a copy of this book, then all you need to do is I'll send you a PDF copy of the book, Aaron, to your email address, and I'm
Please.
more than happy for you to share that with your listeners, because I wrote the book so that it would get read and it would be available to millions of people out there.
Wait,
And
dog, I need to remember, you're saying you're going to send me the PDF for free?
yes, I don't mind,
Sure,
because at
sure.
this stage, I've recovered the costs that I self-published the book with an American publishing company, and I have I've paid my costs at this stage. So I want the book to be read and to be seen by as many people as possible. And if your listeners and if your colleagues and friends can benefit from it, then you feel free to pass it on to them. Look, at lots of people like a physical copy of a book, and they can certainly purchase it on Amazon if they so wish. But if they'd like to see the book and get a taste for it, you can certainly send them a copy, or they can email me to my email address, which is my first name, Kenneth, dot my second name, Monaghan, at atu.ie. So ATU stands for Atlantic Technological University.ie. And I'll get in touch with people and send it back to them. I write a newsletter every week on LinkedIn. I think, Aaron, you're on my list of subscribers, and all of the information is based on the book as well. So if people want, again, a resource for information that hopefully will give them confidence and some guidance, they can try and follow me on LinkedIn, and they'll get those weekly newsletters for free, and lots of the posts that come out as well. Yeah, I'm having a really brilliant time um, over the last 18 months, uh, getting in touch with people, hearing back that people are getting some confidence just by being educated a little bit differently. And that has been fantastic, because that was the purpose of writing the book. I'm 33 years now a physical therapist, and I'm coming to the I'll be retired in probably 10 years time. So I think it's time to give something back. And this was the area that I felt that there was a certain need. Actually, in my book, I talk about one particular patient that I had the absolute pleasure and honor of working with in my locality. And that man was called Dr. Frank McCurtain. And Dr. Frank was a general practitioner, a medical doctor in our local area, fantastic man. And when I worked with him back 20 years ago, it was one of the first times that I truly, truly saw that this man was so frustrated. He'd been just discharged home. Nobody really had given him the guidance that he required. He was a very clever man. He could figure, he wanted to try certain therapies and to try things himself, but there was nobody giving him that confidence or that allowance or that permission to do and try things. His family were all around him and they wanted to do things, and they were paralyzed, as I said earlier, because they were afraid that they might do harm. So the book, came from experiences like that, where I felt, family members need to have very easy to understand information, stroke survivors the same, and a starting program that people could use that's very inexpensive. That's really what I wanted to achieve, because I felt that was possible. So look, we'll see how things go. But thank you very much for having me on, because your show and your podcast has been tremendous for the stroke community. And congratulations on all the fantastic work that you've done. Because I know that people in Ireland know about you and they know about your podcast. And that's a great thing, because it's good to know that that information and support gets all around the world.
Yeah, well, I feel like cannot thank you enough. That's humbling. It's humbling to say that here coming from you. But I also got a spark of hope that everybody out there, Stroke TV media, it can someone you know, it's going to be really pushing out to really make this known. You didn't know that you have the ability to recover. You do. Your brain is built for it. And I think it's really amazing what you're doing. Can I really do? I cannot thank you enough for dedicating your life and doing what you're doing for our community. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you very much for saying that. It's an absolute pleasure, and every week that goes by, I hear from more and more people, and that was the purpose. That's so. Hopefully, I'll learn more and more as the weeks go by as well, and maybe there's need for an updated version of this book, or
Yeah,
perhaps
I
we
would
move.
say volume two is should be definitely there. Give you something to do in your retired life, and try volume two. But can really want to have it back and some hope when you come back on when you can.
Yeah, well, look, it's a great pleasure, because there's lots of other things we can talk about, but you know, the last thing I would say to you, Aaron, is that just based on the whole repetitions idea, uh, probably about 15, 16 years ago, somebody introduced me to Malcolm Gladwell, who's a very famous popular psychology writer, and he's written some fabulous books. But one of the books talked about a thing called the 10,000 hour rule. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, Aaron. And the 10,000
Mhm.
hour principle, or the 10,000 hour rule, is the idea that if you want to become an expert in any area, if you're willing to do 10,000 hours of meaningful practice, then you can become an expert. And there's research from a Swedish university that, backs this up, and Malcolm Gladwell talks about it. And in golf and in chess and in numerous different areas of life, it seems that that's the case, that if you work really, really hard and you do meaningful practice all the time, you get to become an expert and get to the top of your field. And that principle, to be honest, is the one that we apply to stroke rehabilitation as well. So I call it 10,000 repetitions for success. The idea that if you're willing to do, 10,000 repetitions, if you're willing to do the simple, simple movements of the hands, if you're willing to visualize when you haven't got movement in your hands, if you're willing to spend hours where you mentally practice and believe that that your hand can move, then people get extraordinary results. It's hard work, there's no doubt about that, but knowing that your brain can change itself at any moment in time, that's such an important thing, because how are you going to motivate yourself to keep going if you don't know that fact? So yes, maybe we'll talk again, Aaron, because I think there's a lot more in this conversation.
Yeah, there's a lot more. I mean, I came up in my mind, I thought about 3 to 5 topics that I could talk about. But I want you to know, people out there, all the links that you need to know will be in the description of the podcast. But there's hope. And I think, Kenneth, I think part of the biggest thing is that we as stroke survivors, we lose hope. We lose the ability of the neuroplasticity for one instant takes place over the entire lifespan of a person. It never stops. Even harder, yes. There's times harder, but you never stop neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
So I appreciate it being, I appreciate being there. I got so I could keep talking and talking. But again, thank you for being Kenneth.
Oh, you're very welcome, and thanks a million, Aaron. We'll be in touch,
I
and and hopefully some of your listeners will benefit from the information and get some hope, as you say, because it's the messenger, And I suppose if people hear this message coming from, people with who all over the world. And I mean, I'm not the utmost expert in any way in neuroplasticity, but I've experienced, and I work a as a university lecturer, and I work as a researcher, and I have clinical experience. So I have experience in all those different areas. And I will tell your listeners 1000% that neuroplasticity exists. It's something that's happening every second of every day in your life, and you have the ability to change your brain structure and rebuild yourself if you can motivate yourself and get the assistance that you need. And a lot of that can happen in your own home. So hopefully that will give people some encouragement, at least for this moment in time.
Yeah, you're making me want to go do my therapy right now, so it's working. I see it does. Um, okay, well, I'll be to put almost going to put you in touch with another new plastician named John Kennedy, and he developed a whole different avenue. I think you'll enjoy it.
All
Or
right. Okay.
neuroplasticity. But again, appreciate being there. I'll talk to you in the green room when we're done. So don't go anywhere. But thanks again for being here.
Oh, all right.
Could
Thank
you,
you.
do me a favor? Please give your email that somebody can talk to you. How do they get a hold of you? What's your social media?
Oh, will I say that now? So my email address, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier on, is my first name Kenneth, Kenneth, dot my second name Monaghan, Monaghan, at atu.ie. And that's my university email address, but everybody will get me there. And if person wants a copy of the book, PDF copy, just write to me at that email address and I'll send it on. If somebody wants to purchase the book, then the book is available in, obviously, it can be purchased in any bookstore. You may need to order it if it's bookstores that are local to you. Amazon, of course, sells the book all over the world, and you can use your local Amazon as well. Um, and LinkedIn is probably a great resource for me for people to hear some of the messages that are coming from the book and from my research and from my experience, because I write a weekly newsletter. I think we're on issue 88 at the moment, so we've been going for almost a year and a half. And again, simple information for stroke survivors, caregivers of stroke survivors. And I also I have an interesting playlist on Spotify that I call Stroke Recovery at Home, if people are interested in listening to some music as well. So that's where you get me, and of course through yourself, Aaron, because I'll give you all of my details as well, and people can contact me through
Yeah,
you too.
thank you, Ken. Again, I'm saying because everybody walked away some tangible. All the links in this will be in the description of the video. That Kenneth has been nice enough to give us a link to a PDF copy of his book. And that's huge. I'll put a link to that. And also I'll talk to him after, talk about the mirror therapy box, what to do. And so again, Ken, thank you very much for being here.
Set me